Theo. Hi, everyone. Hello, hello. Hi. Hi, hi. Привет, Karine. Hi, Lauren. Hi, Norm. Hi, Dave. Hi, everyone. Hi, Liliana. Hi, Charles. Up. Hi, Beatrice. Hi, Peter. Hi, Jay. Hi, Joe. Hi, Rena. Hi, Prexis. Hi, Gorilla Joe. Hi, everyone. Hi, Kath. Hi, Cheryl. Hi, Tammy. Hi, Bea. Hi, Mariana. Hi, James. Hi, Barbaricus. Hi, Gap. Bye, Pervert. Hi, Veronica. Hey, Carolyn. Russians are starting to retreat, Jay. Yeah. Hi, Salomon. Hi, Віталій. Так, я розмовляю українською. Oh my gosh. How are you doing today? Thank you, Paul. Well, I'm doing all right today. I obviously not swimmingly. Hi, Kathleen, and hi, Jillian. Not swimmingly provided all of the information that has been coming out from Izyum particularly, and all of the information that's been coming out from other territories, while the West gasps in shock. Every single Ukrainian, oh, obrigado, hi, Angela. Every Ukrainian person is neither surprised nor shocked. We were all expecting this. To be honest, I will say that whatever shock you have right now, don't hold on to it, because this is not the worst of what's going to come out. They have been finding torture chambers. They have been finding teenagers that have been locked in the basements. They have been finding mass graves. They have been finding signs of torture on those bodies. Obrigada, right? Sorry. Hi, Sherry. They have been finding a lot of information, and unfortunately, none of it is going to be final. None of it is going to be like, hi, Texas Smoke. None of what's come out right now is the worst of it. None of what's come out right now is shocking. I saw a tweet from someone this morning, and it said, if you are shocked like I am of the things that are coming out from Izyum, then I suggest you turn off the news when Ukraine liberates Mariupol. See, I understand what this person is trying to say. They're trying to say that Izyum is just a small bit of the atrocities that have been. Hi, Cassidy. I actually just started. There is no recap needed yet. Basically, the things that we're going to find in Izyum are going to be horrifying. The things that we're going to find in Izyum are going to be shocking. There are going to be many, and they're going to be gut-wrenching. But those things are not going to be anything compared to what we're going to find in Mariupol. Mariupol was a bloodbath. Mariupol was a bloodbath, and Mariupol was Mariupol was one of the worst tragedies Ukraine has ever seen. And I understand that this person is trying to say just that, but with that tweet, they're prompting people to not look at something just because it makes them uncomfortable. Just because, hi Netlin, just because my Twitter is the same as my TikTok, it's the same as my YouTube. All of my social media has the same handle except for Patreon. Patreon is Spy News Network INTL, referring to Spy News Network International. I also have a Twitch. I have a YouTube, a Twitter, and an Instagram. So where I was leading with this is this tweet is suggesting that because we're going to be incredibly uncomfortable, it is worth turning off the news because you're not going to be able to handle what you're going to see. I want to rebuff that statement and say that you absolutely shouldn't turn off the news, and you absolutely should watch it despite the fact that it's going to be gut-wrenching and despite the fact that it's going to be hard to watch. In fact, specifically because of that, you shouldn't turn off the news when we liberate Mariupol, and you should get yourself to watch everything that we're going to find. Just like everybody stepped over themselves and watched The Schindler's List. The Schindler's List was a movie that was incredibly, incredibly stomach-turning. And it was incredibly upsetting. But it was a movie based on real events. This is the real events happening in real time. These are not stories inspired by real people. These are real people. These were real people. I saw an image, and it's part of the thumbnail, of a decomposing arm of what looks like a Ukrainian soldier wearing a rubber band in Ukrainian colors. And that was a photo of one of the bodies taken out of the mass grave in Izyum. And it tells you everything you need to know about what Russia is doing. Because you stand with Ukraine, because you are Ukrainian, because you love your country, because you love your heritage, because you want your land to be free, you were murdered, tortured, executed. Now, I've said this before on a couple of my streams, and I'm going to say it again. We all watched The Schindler's List because everybody has to know to never forgive and to never forget. Everybody has to know the magnitude of a catastrophe that Holocaust was. Everybody has to know what had happened to Jews. Everybody has to know. Please extend Ukraine the same courtesy as everybody has to know. During World War II, there was no mass media. There was no TV. There was no internet. There was no Twitch. There was no YouTube. There was no TikTok. There was no Instagram. There was no Twitter. There also wasn't censor on these platforms, but there wasn't such a long reach. So people who were outside of bigger cities, outside of reach, couldn't find out exactly what happened. So they could form doubts. So they could form opinions that would lead them to believe that the atrocities that happened never happened. We have social media. We have Twitch. We have Twitter. We have YouTube. We have all the means of letting everybody on the planet see exactly what had happened, exactly how the human rights were violated, exactly what these people had to live through. And yet some of us are choosing to look at it and say that it is fake. So for these reasons, and for the reasons of people that are denying these victims a simple right of courtesy to remember them, to have a day of remembrance of their memory, we have to watch these things. And yes, it's unpleasant. Yes, it's gut-wrenching. Yes, it's stomach-turning. But that's the whole point. In order for you, for us, to never allow this to ever happen to anybody else, every single one of our stomachs needs to be turned. Every single one of our kids' and grandkids' stomachs needs to be turned. We often think of the Holocaust and of history that happened 70, 80 years ago as something super far remote. It's something in the book. It's something you can't see in front of your very eyes. And while you think that it was atrocious and while you agree with it, it doesn't turn your gut because it's not happening in real time. It's like a movie. It's something that we see, we know, we believe, but we don't necessarily experience. This is happening on our watch, in our time. It is not a movie about history. It is not something that we need to visualize. It is not something that we need to understand. It is not something that we need to read about. It is not something that we need to research to invoke a feeling. It is not something that happened in recent history. It is something that is happening in front of you. It is not something that's happening to fictional characters based on stories. It is not something that your great-grandmother has to tell you about, a person that you can't relate to because you didn't know them, right? It is happening today. It is happening today. It is happening in real world. It is happening in front of your very eyes, not in a history book. It is happening to people you might know. It might have happened to an uncle of a woman who lives down the street from you that you didn't know was Ukrainian. It could be happening to the family of a kid who lives next door to you who was adopted from Ukraine and you didn't know. It is happening way closer to you than you could ever imagine, because we all live in globalism and everybody has connections to everyone and to everything. It is happening to families of people you watch on TikTok. It is happening to families of people you watch on Twitter. It is happening to families of people you watch on YouTube. Bucha is Auschwitz. Mariupol is going to be Auschwitz. Izyum is Auschwitz. People pay money for tickets to visit Auschwitz to honor the victims of the Holocaust. Well, you're in the front row seat to real-life Auschwitz on every inch of the occupied territories of Ukraine. Not that Auschwitz wasn't real life. It was. It just wasn't at the time at which it was visual for you, right? It's something that we pay money to go visit, to understand what happened, to better visualize what people there went through. Here, we're watching it on front row seat. And unfortunately, a lot of people worldwide are not even willing to admit that it is happening. And you know, one of the things that pisses me off the most about all of the trolls, about all of the deniers, about all of the Americans who believe Russian propaganda, about all of these things, about all of the people who say that it's not true, is simply the fact that there were people tortured, there were people who were murdered, there were people who were filtrated, there were people who went through a reign of Russian terror, and they're being denied a simple recognition that they have ever existed. And their life is being written off as an invention of cumulative American Western CIA efforts for disinformation. And those are real people who deserve to be honored in a real way. Those are people who unfortunately became casualties of an evil attack on sovereignty and democracy. Those are the people that 70 years from now, our great-grandchildren, our grandchildren are going to learn about in history books. These are the people whose graves they're going to be paying tickets to visit, to know history. And the fact that there are people being paid to devalue the life of these victims and make it seem like they never existed, and they do it, is honestly the reason why this is still possible in 2022. You want to tell me that the soldiers who were buried with their hands tied never existed? You want to tell me that the kids who died from bullet wounds never existed? You want to tell me that Ukrainian families who were having breakfast when a missile striked into their house never existed? Not only, by participating in Russian propaganda, at least don't say that this shit never existed. Because these are real people with families and lives and stories, aspirations, dreams, pets, accomplishments, and you're wiping them off the face of the planet, both physically and metaphorically, both literally and metaphorically, because you are saying their life didn't matter. Their life didn't exist. They didn't exist. By that, denying them a basic decency of being remembered. And that is the most disgusting thing that troll efforts do. Because to all the trolls, I wouldn't even want to erase your life and what you have done from the face of the planet. I think that your job is the most despicable job anybody could ever do. But I would never, ever, ever deny you the basic decency of acknowledging that you had a life and you made those choices and that you had a family and someone, I don't know why, but cared for you. And you mattered to someone. And I wouldn't deny that, even to the most disgusting, despicable, filthy, evil person on the planet. And you're denying that to real people who didn't do anything. They just existed. They just existed in a country where they were born, in a nationality they identify with. I watched an interview of a little girl who was kidnapped with her family to Russia. They call that refugees. We call that forcefully deported people. And she was saying that her and her family was forced to live in a camp. And in that camp, sometimes they were given toys and they were playing with Legos and with other things. And at some point, a Russian soldier came up, took 2 Lego figures, and said, "This is a Ukrainian soldier. This is a Russian soldier. Дякую, привіт." And then he took a little, gun toy and made the Russian soldier shoot the figure of a Ukrainian soldier. Then he came up to the little girl and said, "You're Russian now. Mariupol is a Russian city now." And the little girl recounting these events, she looks like she's about 11, maybe 12. She said, "I was born in Ukraine. That's not how it works. I'm Ukrainian. Just because my city is occupied does not automatically make me Russian." And that's an 11-year-old who understands how your identity and how your belonging works. You can deport as many people as you want. You can try to brainwash as many people as you want. You can try to impose they're not fairy tales, they're horror stories about Russian mightiness onto as many kids as you want. You can't erase their identity. Forcefully kidnapping them into Russia does not make them Russian. They have a heartbeat and they have compassion. They can never, ever, ever be Russian. No matter how many times you brainwash them, no matter what you do to them. These people have a soul. These people have a soul, they have a love for their country, and that by default makes it impossible for them to ever be Russian. They have humility. They have respect for human life. And that by default makes them impossible to become Russian. No matter what you try to do to us, no matter how much you torture us, no matter what you make up about our country, our soldiers, and our intentions, you can erase us from the face of the planet. But you can't turn us into Russians. You can erase us. You can't erase our identity. You can deport kids. You can't erase their identity. You can filtrate adults. You can't erase their identity. You can destroy homes and wipe out cities. You can't erase our history. You can erase every last standing building, every last growing piece of wheat. You can erase every last centimeter of Ukrainian soil, but you will never erase Ukraine. And you will never erase Ukrainian identity. You've tried for over 300 years. And we're still here, aren't we? I'm going to read you something before I jump into the news. And that's kind of a very brief thing that I want to say in terms of what's been happening in Ukraine. While everybody collectively gasps at all of the things that Ukraine has to go through now, and while everybody collectively gets in shock, and while everybody can't believe that it's happening, to Ukrainians, it's just part of an unfortunate and heartbreaking norm. This is the modern history of Ukraine. This same stuff was recent history of Ukraine, starting in 1919 when the Bolsheviks won and took over Ukrainian National Republic. This has been ancient Ukrainian history when the Tsardom of Moscovia appropriated our history, name, cultures, and traditions and turned into the Empire of Russia in 1700s. And the reason why I often say it's been over 300 years is because in the 1700s, the Tsardom of Moscovia became the Russian Empire. They stole the name, they stole the history, they've done the same stuff they have today. This is what had been happening to Cossacks. And no one knew, and no one cared. This is what had been happening to Ukrainian villages. And no one cared, and no one knew. This is what had been happening to Crimean Tatars. And no one cared, or no one knew. This is what has been happening to the population of Ukrainian villages during Holodomor, and no one cared and no one knew. This is what had been happening to the 6 years, and no one cared and no one knew. This is what had been happening to all of the Ukrainian people who dared to fight for their identity and language, and no one cared and no one knew. A typical Ukrainian family story involves at least one person in your bloodline that had died for simply expressing their nationality in their own country. And only now are most of us realizing that that is not okay. And that isn't just our issue and our problem. And it is what it is. Because for some reason, most other countries that have gone through far less than 300 years of this, of mass graves, of torture, of annihilation, of a genocide, get a courtesy of at least a day of remembrance or a day of recognition of atrocities. And we just kind of live as Ukrainians in Ukraine with our family stories. that warrant blank stares from everybody who is not Ukrainian, thinking that it is just what it is, and it's normal. But it shouldn't be. Don't let it become normal again. Don't let it become something that future generations of Ukrainian kids are going to be talking about the same way that my grandparents were talking about to me. Don't let it become normal. Don't let it become simple, average Ukrainian family history due to be repeated over and over and over again. Don't let it become normal. Don't get desensitized to it. Don't let it. Don't let a generation of people 70 years from now be shocked if Russia does this again. It's not shocking. It's not new. It's not mind-blowing. It's not earth-shattering. It's not insane. Unfortunately, for a nation of 45 million people, that is just another generation in Ukraine. You know, the interesting thing, if you think about it, is that there hasn't been a single generation of Ukrainian people that didn't have to go through a form of Russian genocide. Not a single one. Not a single one. Police discover mass grave of 440 bodies in Izyum. All bodies will be exhumed and sent to forensic examination. This is what those sites normally look like. This cross says unidentified armed forces of Ukraine. Number 187. Russia has used hypersonic weapons in Ukraine almost to no avail, U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks said, according to CNN. Hicks made the announcement while speaking at an AFCEA Intelligence and Homeland Security Alliance summit. As you know, Russia used hypersonic missiles in the spring. The equipment of Russians in and around Izyum was left behind. Not that this garbage is usable, but scrap metal to maybe build bridge parts or something. See, I don't know, Jay, if there are going to be. So Jay on TikTok is saying, what is the reaction going to be by Ukraine after the war? I know there are going to be reparations. Well, here's the thing, like, you have to force a country to pay reparations. And it's hard to force Russia to do anything. So I don't know if there are going to be reparations. I don't know if Russia is going to pay what they owe. What the reaction is going to be like in Ukraine after victory, well, that depends, because it depends on whether the world goes back to normal and on whether everybody just collectively decides that they have done their job and now they can continue buying gas, and now they can ease up the sanctions, and now they can be okay, and now everything is just going to go back to smooth. See, I don't know what the reaction of Ukraine is going to be, because are we going to recognize this worldwide as a deliberate genocide of Ukrainian people, unlike we didn't do with Holodomor? Are we going to admit that it was a deliberate genocide of Ukrainian people? Are we going to extend this courtesy so that in history, forever, Russia goes down as a genocidal maniac? Are we going to start learning history deeper and seeing where Russia has deceived the whole world? Are we going to start teaching about these atrocities in schools the way we teach about World War II? Because if that's not going to happen, then the reaction of Ukraine is really also not going to happen. We are just going to continue living our life and wait until the next time that the world is going to be shocked that Russia had done it. Because in order for them to never be able to do anything like that again, they need to be treated as what they are, a genocidal nation that has been raining terror on Ukraine for over 300 years. The results of the counteroffensive of the armed forces of Ukraine in the Kharkiv region resulted in 150,000 freed residents, 388 freed settlements, 8,500 square kilometers of territory. Kharkiv is now only 3% occupied. Kharkiv region at the beginning of the counteroffensive a week and a half ago was 34% occupied, and now it's down to 3%. This is how the planes now look at the destroyed Hostomel airport. Recall the Russians destroyed the legendary An-225 Mriya at the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Also, 3 planes were destroyed and 5 were damaged at the Hostomel airport. As servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine drove through the streets of the liberated Shevchenkova in the Kharkiv region. Local children and children from displaced families study together in schools in the west of Ukraine. They socialize, play different games, share their problems, and smile. However, when asked what they're sad about, they all bring up the war. Russia steals their real childhood. All the children have sad looks in their eyes. what's another sad thing? There was a spike in views a couple of days ago where so many people, up to like 100 at a time, were watching my YouTube streams, right? And that made me so happy, not because engagement, not because the amount of people, but I thought that people care again. I thought that people care. And that spike lasted about 3 days when people wanted to know how many settlements Ukraine freed and share in the glory. And the second that gore followed, gore like this, gore like the mass graves. No one's here. None of the people who followed me for news updates of Ukraine, out of 100, there are 30. The armed forces of Ukraine together to victory. A bit of a palate cleansing video. At the beginning of September, Russia destroyed Ukrainian infrastructure worth $114.5 billion. Almost 42% of this amount is housing. There are only direct losses. The total is much greater. All countries should unite against Russia's aggression in Ukraine and not stand aside. John Kirby, spokesman for the U.S. National Security Council, urged China in an interview with CNN not to support Moscow and its war against Ukraine. Our message to China, I think, was consistent. Now is not the time to do any business with Putin, given what he has done inside Ukraine. Now is not the time to isolate ourselves from the rest of the international community, which has largely condemned what he's doing in Ukraine, Kirby said. Z symbols have been noticed in Barcelona. Unknown people painted historical monuments with Z symbols in the center of Barcelona, which are used by the Russian army in Ukraine. Thus, the Russists' signs appeared on the old wall of the Roman Empire, built between the 4th and 1st centuries BC, as well as on the building that houses the volunteer center that assists Ukrainian refugees. Hi, Ireland. And this is the refugee center. Now, here is, if you remember, there was an army medic, a battlefield medic, Yulia under call name Taira. She was a battlefield medic in Mariupol. And a couple of days ago, she gave her testimony of the war crimes when she was in captivity. She was in captivity, in Russian captivity, as she was captured in the siege of Mariupol. So I'm going to read you her testimony, as it is incredibly powerful. A hospital full of wounded soldiers and civilians where anesthetic drugs have run out, antibiotics are about to run out too. Soldiers and entire medical staff sleeping 2-3 hours daily because surgeries are one right after another. Medevac cars arriving every 5-10 minutes, where the wounded and the dead are lying on top of each other, and whose fates are too impossible to understand even if you tried. Burning cars with burning people in them. Police officers taking out of the rubble women and children mutilated beyond recognition. People collecting water from puddles. Looted homes. Dogs who once were pets dragging human limbs around the city. Prisoners who were forced to take off clothes by their killers before they were murdered, slowly and slaughtered. Specially prepared torture chambers. Do you know why we do this to you? Bayevska said, a Russian soldier asked her as he tortured her. Because you can, she responded. Pregnant prisoners, their fate unknown to their relatives or to the state. A fighter who was beaten for 3 hours and then thrown into a basement like a sack, and only a day later someone came to see him. A dead child in a mother's arm, a 7-year-old boy with bullet wounds, dying in my lap because I could not ward off death in his case. Prisoners in their cells screaming for weeks and dying from torture without any medical help during their interment of hell. The only thing they felt before death was abuse and beating. My friend, whose eyes I closed before his body closed down, and another friend, and another, and another. A city of 500,000 people dying before my eyes under airstrikes, methodical, planned. Airstrikes in hospitals and residential areas. And that is just part of Payevska's testimony that was made public. According to her, the prisoners in their cells screamed and died from torture for weeks. The only thing they felt before they died was bullying and beating. Rescuers get women and children mutilated beyond recognition from under the rubble. She testified before the Helsinki Commission of the US Congress. So far, she's the main witness. About 5 million Ukrainians returned to Ukraine from the EU, the head of the European Commission. The Russians shelled Nikopol and Kyiv Independent districts of the Dnipropetrovsk region 6 times overnight. More than 40 Russian shells were fired at Nikopol by the Russians. A 57-year-old woman was wounded. 11 multi-story and private houses, a lyceum, a kindergarten, a social service center, several enterprises, gas pipelines, and power lines were damaged in the city. 3 apartment buildings and a store were damaged in the Kyiv district. People were not injured. The armed forces of Ukraine managed to seize a nearly intact R-149 MA-1 command post vehicle based on the BTR-80. Ukrainian military aircraft conducted 18 strikes on places of concentration of the enemy's manpower and equipment over the previous day. The military managed to hit 13 strongholds, areas where Russian weapons and military equipment were concentrated, and 5 positions of air defense systems. The United States announced a new $600 million military aid package. It contains additional ammunition for HIMARS systems, tens of thousands of 105mm artillery shells, 1,000 high-precision 155mm shells, anti-drone systems, demining equipment, and more. After a successful counterattack by the armed forces of Ukraine and the defeat of Russian troops in the Kharkiv region, Russian authorities are intensifying hidden mobilization and recruitment for war in Ukraine, according to Institute for the Study of War. Героям слава! Armed clashes are taking place along the entire perimeter of the Kyrgyz-Tajik state border, the border service of the State Committee for National Security of Kyrgyzstan. According to the agency's press service, the Tajik side began shelling the areas of the villages of Kulundu, Maksat, and Janejer in the Leylek district, Batkent region. Some Turkish hotels have stopped accepting Russian Mir bank cards amid pressure from the United States and the European Union on Ankara. Zelensky said that in addition to the United States and Germany, Ukraine is negotiating with France, Italy, and Israel to strengthen its air defense systems. Our priority today is anti-missile defense. We have started these conversations, and there are results in the delivery of NASAMS and IRIS-T. As for the German partners, we are waiting for several systems. So far, we have not received any, as well as from the United States, said the president. As of today, Russia will no longer be a party to the European Convention on Human Rights, reported Radio Liberty journalist Ricard Zoviak. Hi, D-Rocks on Twitch. Russian propaganda outlets report an explosion outside the regional administration building in the center of occupied Kherson. The leadership of the occupation authorities was in the building of the Court of Appeal at the time of the explosion. Here are some videos. Hi, Matt. Russian propaganda media also report explosions outside the General Prosecutor's office in the center of Luhansk. The Prosecutor General of the LPR was unalived in the explosion in the building of the Prosecutor General's office in Luhansk, Russian media reports. The European Parliament demands that the Russian Federation stop forced deportations of Ukrainians. The Parliament strongly condemned reports of atrocities committed by the Russian armed forces, their accomplices, and the occupation authorities in Ukraine. It has been reported earlier, let me remind you, that about 2 million Ukrainians, including children, have been forcefully deported to Russia. Some disappeared without a trace, some were put in filtration camps, some were given Russian citizenship and sent to live in remote Russian towns. That is how Russia has always been replacing native population of territories they occupy with the population of Russia. They just sent them to super unpopulated, very far remote Russian areas where no one wants to live, and then bring Russians from the super clogged and very populated Russian areas into the territories that they want to Russify. Another Russian Su-25 attack aircraft was destroyed over the Kherson region, Ukrainian Air Force. Also, I don't know if you know this, but let me show you a map of Russia. Right? So most of the population of Russia, out of this gigantic country, most of the population of it is concentrated over in these regions. Siberia. No one lives there. Well, not no one, but a lot of people don't. So when you think about all of these people from Russia that come to live in the occupied places, whether it be Transnistria, whether it be Abkhazia and Ossetia, whether it be literally any place that they have ever invaded. All of these people are coming from here because the population of all of this lives here. And then all of these people are being deported to here. To here. The Russians struck at the hydrotechnical structure of Kyiv Independent again today. There is serious damage to the hydraulic structures. Rescuers and emergency services are already eliminating the consequences to prevent a man-made disaster. Valentina Znichenko, head of the Dnipropetrovsk Regional Military Administration, reported this. The Russian military destroyed about 70% of the buildings in Izyum, but life will return there along with the Ukrainian flag. Switzerland, following the EU, is terminating the visa facilitation agreement with Russians. About time. Now, here is a video from Ukraine Now. You all know I love this news source, and so I am going to download it, and I'm going to play it full screen on YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. And then if you are on TikTok, then let me prop it up for you so you can see it too. It's about a minute and a half, or a minute, almost 2 minutes. And I will show it to you. The title of the video is, it's about the historic victory of the Ukrainians in Kharkiv direction and breakthrough that took place in very difficult conditions because the enemy both possessed and still possesses a significant advantage in combat equipment, artillery, tanks, aviation, and ammunition. So let me send it over so you guys can see it. One sec. You guys know I find Ukraine Now videos incredibly educational. I really like what they have done and how they have made this really, really awesome, informative rubric that I find incredibly helpful in showing a lot of the events from this war and explaining how things work. One sec. Why didn't this? One sec. I don't know why it didn't get sent for some reason. Oh, there we go. You know, normal difficulties of a non-professional news outlet. So that is Ukraine Now. Also, I am being told. So I made the YouTube stream 18 plus because of the grave excavations, as I wouldn't want, young children to see this. And I'm being told that that might have made it less promotable for the algorithm. But I wouldn't want, school children to find the stream and listen to things about, mutilated bodies, especially because the thumbnail of this stream is pretty graphic. Water supply has been stabilized in Kryvyi Rih. Alexander Vikul, head of the military administration of Kryvyi Rih. Problems with the water supply arose due to Russia's shelling. Latvia has restricted entry to Russians starting September 19th. Minister of Foreign Affairs of Latvia, Edgars Rinkevics, explained such measures as a response to Russian aggression against Ukraine and security considerations. Ukraine received 100 Ukraine received 131 million from electricity exports in the first 2 weeks. Ukrainian electricity ranked second in the trade balance after traditionally large volumes of agricultural products, rapeseed, and wheat, said Volodymyr Kudrytsky, chairman of the board of the national power company Ukrenergo. Kudrytsky emphasized that due to export of electricity, our country is gradually turning into a strategically important partner of the EU. According to him, Ukrenergo's goal is to establish Ukraine as a guarantor of energy security in Eastern and Central Europe. Also, I want to kind of elaborate for a second on why I made this specific stream 18 plus and didn't make the other streams 18 plus, because I feel like if a child is browsing YouTube and they come across my normal stream and it says politics, and there is an image of Putin and an image of like a Ukrainian flag, I would say they are very not likely to click on that stream, because why? Which child is interested in learning about political intricacies, you closing access to Russians, somebody cutting a deal, and language that they might not understand, right? I doubt a 12-year-old would click on that stream, because simply it just would not pique their attention, right? Or a 14-year-old. Because it just sounds like a bunch of political language that they wouldn't be interested in. A bunch of political language that they wouldn't be interested in. Now, today's stream has very graphic images on it, and it says for over 440 bodies were found in Izyum in mass graves, right? These are graphic images of gore, and there are no difficult words. There are no difficult things that a child would look at and be like, oh, this is a political stream. Provided that kids play Counter-Strike, kids play violent games and stuff like that, I feel like the likelihood of a kid clicking into it and listening to horrifying things that have been happening simply because, ooh, images, would be higher. And that's why I restricted it to be shown to adults, because again, I wouldn't want a child to see an image of like a mutilated body on a thumbnail. And first of all, shocking. Normally my images are Ukrainian flags, Ukrainian army, Zelensky, Putin, some European delegation, something like that. This is much more graphic, and I feel like this is much more clickable for someone for shock value, right? And I totally wouldn't want to traumatize a kid, Chinese leader Xi Jinping abstained from attending the dinner with 11 heads of state, including Putin and Erdogan. Interesting. See, China flip-flops a lot because China is thinking about China, and China is thinking about Chinese economy, and China doesn't really care about anything but Chinese economy and profits. So it's very interesting to me, because I've been kind of looking at their behavior this entire time, and I was very curious as to like what their goal is. and sort of what they're trying to do here, right? Because clearly they just want to make sure that if Russia is still a feasible partner, they're not losing it. And America is one of the biggest importers of Chinese stuff. So they don't want to lose that either. But now I'm very surprised. I'm very confused as to what their like logic behind their actions is, because they spread Russian propaganda on TV yet won't send Russia weapons. Then they say that they stand with Russia in a way, but then they won't help Russia in any way, right? They will kind of they will speak for Ukraine and against Russia in their embassies and consulates and reassure Europe that they stand with Ukraine and that the atrocities committed by Russians in Ukraine are unacceptable. They won't attend a dinner with Putin. So it's kind of like, what is the logic here at this point? Because I don't see the logic. It's like every day they say something different. Yesterday it was we still think Russia is, a good country. Today it'll be Russian atrocities in Ukraine are awful coming from a Chinese ambassador. Then it'll be exercises between Russia and China together. Then it'll be condemnation of Russian actions. Then it'll be some sort of a joint venture. Then the next day they will say that Russia is a weak state that they don't need. And at this point, I'm confused. I'm genuinely confused. And I don't mean it in a way where, like, trust me, I have been following China and what they have been doing in terms of this war since February, right? And I have a pretty good grasp on what they're doing. As I said before, they need Russia because Russia is now buying all of their stuff from China, as in, like, AliExpress right now is booming as nobody else is importing anything into Russia. So China is making some good money off of Russia. China is buying some gas. China's getting some deals, right? As in, like, I fully understand that, but also they don't want to burn a bridge with the West because, the West is the real money and Russia is going broke. And at this point, they also see that Russia is not a good strategic partner because Russian military is garbage and Russia doesn't really have anything to show for themselves. But their actions lately have not been sort of like that. They have been bipolar. As in, by that, I'm not saying that they're trying to show one thing and do another thing to sort of keep both relationships. I'm saying that they're saying things that directly contradict each other, and they're now saying them publicly. Not just say one thing, do another thing, right? They're quite literally just having these, like, a very bipolar changes of moods. And I really don't, I'm really confused at this point as to what the logic behind all of this stuff is. And so I want to research a little more what's going on within the country, because it is, frankly, at this point, not making any sense to me. The whole world should see this, a world in which there should be no cruelty and terrorism. But all this is here, and its name is Russia. More than 400 bodies were found at the mass burial site in Izyum, with signs of torture, children, those killed as a result of missile attacks, warriors of the armed forces of Ukraine. Russia leaves only death and suffering, murderers, torturers, deprived of everything human. You won't run away, you won't hide. Retribution will be justly dreadful for every Ukrainian, for every tortured soul. Most of the bodies of soldiers were found with their hands tied behind their back. This is a little detail that this article doesn't mention, but I will because I think it's important. They were executed. You know, execution style? They were murdered. Execution style, except it wasn't an execution style. It was execution of the defenders of their own country, of the peace of their civilians. And you know what boggles my mind is that these Russians who torture Ukrainian civilians, who torture Ukrainian medics, who torture Ukrainian army, they come up to them and they say, you know why we do this to you? Their response is normally, you know, because you're Nazis and because you're bad and stuff like that. But these are the soldiers, the same ones that were just saying, looting, and assaulting. How do you justify that in your incredibly backwards mind, as you are here, the one who is saying, looting, torturing, and murdering, and then you genuinely believe that you're punishing Ukrainian soldiers because they mistreat civilians? Meanwhile, you see with your eyes that they're coming here to protect these civilians from you. That is not brainwash. That is not brainwash. That is some serious psychological problems that I don't think anybody can address or help work through. Because what has to be happening in your damned mind for you to literally look at a person who was just defending a civilian from your actions, and for you to say that they are the problem? Like, are you crazy? Genuinely. What kind of a mental disorder has to be behind this for someone to not be able to process that information? How deranged does one have to be? And I don't say it to be offensive. I mean, we people, we really throw the word deranged out there as like just a description of somebody who is not like fully there in terms of like, oh, you were deranged, you like some weird stuff. No. I mean, in the pure definition of the word, how deranged does one have to be for that to not be processed in their brain? The Russian invaders used heavy artillery to shell a village in Dnipropetrovsk region, reports Valentin Reznichenko, the head of Dnipropetrovsk Regional Military Administration. 2 people have died and 1 man was injured. The doctors assess his injuries as moderate. Some buildings were destroyed in the village. The scale of the damage is currently being clarified. The work and restoration of residential buildings and crucial infrastructure is ongoing on the liberated territories of Kharkiv Region, reports Kirill Tymoshenko, deputy head of the Office of the President of Ukraine. In total, 421 settlements of Kharkiv Region were liberated. We keep supplying the liberated districts with humanitarian aid despite its shelling. The Balaklia community has already received over 100 tons of food supplies. According to Tymoshenko, pyrotechnics of the State Emergency Service are working on demining the territory. Over 24 hectares have been demined and over 1,000 of explosive devices neutralized over the first week. Can I help you? Dog? What prompted you to get here? Sinuana. Gremlin. What's up, Gremlin? What's up? According to Timoshenko, pyrotechnics of the State Emergency Service are working on demining the territory. Over 24 hectares have been demined and over 1,000 of explosive devices neutralized over the first week. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights office said on Friday it wanted to send a team to Izyum to verify Ukrainian allegations that a mass grave had been found after recapturing the city from Russia. Our colleagues in Ukraine are following up on these allegations, and they are aiming at organizing a monitoring visit to Izyum to determine the circumstances of the death of these individuals. Spokeswoman Elizabeth Throssell said. She added that the team was hoping to visit the northern city soon. It's important that the circumstance of the death of these people who may be in these collective graves be established, highlighted Elizabeth Throssell. So you have to go and verify it, right? Because Bucha didn't happen because all of these atrocities earlier didn't happen, and it's so hard to believe that Ukrainians are alleging that we found mass graves, and you have to go and establish the circumstances of the death of these people, because normally it's a normal thing, to just mass bury random people in mass graves on a random burial site with little crossboards covering their graves. Yes, it's totally normal. That's why it's not uncanny to have to set a European High Commission to make sure that a mass grave site made by Russians of tortured and unalived people with their hands tied behind their back did really happen, because the photos and the evidence and the forensics are not enough, right? Because Ukraine could have just discovered a random mass burial site. Just, the villagers, kind of when they bury their loved ones, they just tie their hands behind their backs and just throw them in there. Oh, and also these bodies, although could have been there for ages, right? Could have resulted from anything. They're not fully decomposed yet because it's only been 6 months, right? Yeah, totally normal. Absolutely nothing suspicious there. The aim is to collect €1 billion for Ukraine. Daydex is launching a project on selling of pictures of NFTs, reports Ukrinform. A Lithuanian company, Daydex, is set to create a global fundraising project, Project Phoenix, planning to use modern technologies to collect €1 billion for the benefit of the Ukrainian people. We are initiating Project Phoenix. Over the last month, we were able to complete development of our platform through which you can make donations for Ukrainians. We've also launched 8 call centers in Europe for people to call and make donations as well, reports the company representative, Dennis Tott. Ten torture chambers of the Russian army were discovered in the liberated cities of the Kharkiv region. At the same time, at least 445 burials were found in the Izyum forest, according to the national police. Thank you, Judy. Germany has confiscated the assets of Russia's Rosneft. The government has transferred the assets of the German subsidiaries of Rosneft to the external management of the Federal Network Agency. President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, has ratified the visa-free regime for transport vehicles agreement, reports the president's office. Zelensky has ratified the agreement between Ukraine and the EU on cargo transportation by automotive vehicles, also known as visa-free regime for transport vehicles. The parties have signed the agreement back on June 29th in Lyon. It allows Ukrainian cargo carriers to travel in European countries without obtaining a permit. The agreement will remain in force until June 30th of 2023, but the parties will engage in consultations on the necessity of the agreement's extension. The number of killed people in Izyum may be several times higher than the number of those killed in Bucha, reports Oleg Kotenko, the Commissioner of Persons Gone Missing Under Special Circumstances. We are currently working on exhumation of the bodies of our servicemen. After that, the bodies will be transferred to the experts for further establishment of the dead persons' identities. Sadly, this is only the beginning of our work here. At the moment, we can't say how many locations like this one will be found on the liberated territories. But the harsh reality of the situation indicates that the number of victims may be several times higher than the numbers associated with the Bucha tragedy. I'm not going to comment on this because that's what I've been saying all along. Belgium will supply Ukraine with large caliber machine guns and ammunition for them, reports Ludivine de Donder, Belgium defense minister. The new 12 million euros worth assistance package will also include non-lethal materials for the winter season, helmets, extra equipment, reconnaissance equipment. The residents of Kherson are waiting for the Ukrainian armed forces. They're waiting, but they're not staying idle. Activists of the Yellow Ribbon movement keep painting out the graffiti with the Russian flags, tearing down the Russian agitation materials, and burning the invaders' newspapers in Kherson. Take a look. Yellow ribbons are also a symbol of resistance in occupied areas along with the Yi. And the reason why they're yellow is because that's the ribbon that the armed forces of Ukraine wear on their arms. Senior U.S. officials tell CNN they're disappointed U.S.-led sanctions haven't had a bigger impact so far on the Russian economy and are now predicting that the harshest effects probably won't materialize until early next year at the earliest. Russia's economy still shrunk by about 4% between April and June as compared to the same period last year, but that's nowhere near the 15% decline that some had expected earlier in the year. We were expecting that things like SWIFT and all the blocking sanctions on Russia's banks would totally crater the Russian economy, and that basically by now, going into September, we'd be dealing with an economically much more weakened Russia than the one that we're dealing with. A separate senior administrator official cautioned CNN, however, that the officials crafting the sanctions in the months leading up to the war always believed that the steepest impacts would not necessarily be immediate. I think we've had from the beginning a view that when Russia invaded Ukraine and we imposed the sanctions, they were going to be, in all likelihood, a mid to long-term sanctions regime, the official said. That is because we wanted to keep pressure on Russia over the long term as it waged war on Ukraine, and we wanted to degrade Russia's economic and industrial capabilities, so we have always seen this as a long-term game. Right, but here's the thing. You are basically admitting to your sanctions not being harsh enough. Yeah, sure, you want to reassure the world that you are planning to do this long term, but you are also telling the world that you screwed up and that you did not sanction the proper institutions and the proper places for Russian economy to collapse harder than it did. And in all reality, that is true because they have been tiptoeing around the real sanctions, the stuff that would make Russia weak, the stuff that would leave Russia without surviving chances, the stuff that would make Russia ask the US and ask Europe to come back. This leaves Russia with India, China, Africa, and they just keep on keeping on. The volunteers have repaired the smashed roof of a house in Irpin, reports Irpin City Council, in 3 days. 25 volunteers of the Volunteer Battalion project have repaired the rafter structure riddled with the shrapnel and covered 120 square meters of the roof with new metallic tiles. This has been some repairs done in cities like Izyum. Oh, Irpin. That's a city near Bucha. The Washington Post. Before the Ukrainian counteroffensive, the Russian soldiers stationed in Izyum, Kharkiv region, were morally depressed, and a lot of them refused to fulfill their duties. The Ukrainian servicemen have found at least 10 handwritten reports by the occupiers asking to relieve them from duty. Ukrainian soldiers have given these reports over to the journalists. Among them, the statements of the Russian soldiers were discovered complaining about moral exhaustion, declining health and lack of medical assistance, and physical and psychological exhaustion. The locals have revealed that before the retreat, the Russians introduced a 24/7 curfew and started to scavenge through local residential buildings looking for civilian clothes so that they won't be seen wearing the military uniform. Later on, some of them fled on foot or on bicycles. I ask you to fire me, the commander of the 2nd Zenith Rocket Brigade of the 2nd Zenith Rocket Battalion of the Zenith Rocket Battery, Sergeant Ashchaliv. I'm sorry, their handwriting is awful. Hi, Dave. From the rows of the armed forces of Russia for the reason of physical and moral exhaustion. I no longer want to participate in the special military operation on the territory of Ukraine. I'm a vice commander of the 4th Zenith Rocket Battalion of the Zenith Rocket Battery, Sergeant blah blah blah, Senior Sergeant blah blah blah, decline to fulfill my duties in the special military operation on the territory of Ukraine for reasons of lack of rest and moral exhaustion. I ask you to fire me, Vice Commander of the 1st Zenith Rocket, the same place, from the rows of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, and I decline to partake in special military operation on the territory of Ukraine for the reason of my declining health and no ability to receive medical attention. Hi, Edgar. Moscow's military reserves may be smaller than initially assumed, reports Reuters. Russia has suffered significant troop and equipment losses in Ukraine, said Germany's Defense Minister Christine Lambrecht. The notion that the Russian forces have virtually unlimited military means at their disposal is not matched by reality, she added. Noting that Russia needed to repair a lot of equipment and was having a hard time recruiting enough new personnel. Nevertheless, one should not be mistaken. Russia is far from defeated and still has various military options. Lambrecht also said Berlin was ready to support Kyiv long term. Yeah, if your deliveries ever make it to us, because you seem to promise a lot of stuff and then it never gets there. Exhumation of the dead bodies has started at the mass burial site in Izyum, reports Hromadzka. In total, 444 crosses with numbers on them were discovered, but some graves may contain several bodies. There were 17 bodies piled into a single grave, presumably those of the Ukrainian servicemen. 2 of the victims had their hands tied behind their backs. Here are some pictures. Let's see what Kyiv Independent has to say. Pope says it is morally unacceptable to supply Ukraine with weapons for self-defense. Pope Francis told reporters on September 15th that sending weapons to Ukraine for self-defense against Russian aggression is morally acceptable. Self-defense is not only licit, but also an expression of love for the homeland. Someone who does not defend oneself, who does not defend something, does not love it. Those who defend something love it. Pope Francis said, Reuters reports. Oh, hi, 300. Hi, good to see you. Very, very good to see you. Ukrainian air defense shoots down Russian cruise missile over Odessa Oblast. Washington Post says U.S. restricts fentanyl exports to Russia, says its potential weapon. The U.S. Department of Commerce has made it mandatory to obtain a U.S. government license for any sales of the drug to Russia and Belarus as of September 15th, citing its potential use as a weapon. Ukraine, Moldova, Romania agree to increase cross-border electricity trade. Zelensky, Trudeau discuss Russia ongoing aggression against Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said in a Twitter post he spoke with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on September 15th about the ongoing Russian invasion, Canada's continued support, and how to further hinder Russia's aggression against Ukraine. In August, Canada disbursed a $348 million loan to Ukraine for the purchase of gas before the heating season. Von der Leyen visits schools damaged by Russian invasion in Irpin. First Lady of Ukraine, Olena Zelenska, traveled with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen to 2 schools heavily damaged by Russia's invasion in Irpin in Kyiv Oblast on September 15th. The day before, von der Leyen pledged 100 million euros to rebuild Ukrainian schools. Ukraine begins restoring electricity in recently liberated villages in Kharkiv Oblast. Russia has launched over 3,800 missiles at Ukraine since the start of full-scale invasion. Attacker of 2 Ukrainian women in France was Ukrainian, not Russian. Original report on September 12th said 2 women from Izyum, Kharkiv Oblast, residing in Rokobrun Cap Martin, were allegedly beaten by a Russian man after playing Ukrainian music from their phone. The man, is in fact a 33-year-old Ukrainian former soldier who now works as a bodyguard, French media reported. The man will be tried in court on November 17th and faces 3 years in prison and a fine of 45,000 euros, according to reports. I really want to follow up on this story because I'm wondering if he's a former Ukrainian soldier, why did he beat them for playing Ukrainian music? Russian troops shell 5 communities in Sumy Oblast. U.S. announces new 600 military aid package for Ukraine. Ukrainian forces destroy Russian tanks, armored vehicles, and artillery systems in Kherson Oblast. Russia lost 70 troops, 5 tanks, 14 armored vehicles, and 8 different types of artillery systems. Russia shells districts of Kharkiv. Explosions reported in Russian city of Belgorod Oblast. Russia's Belgorod Oblast Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov said the city of Valuyki lost power after the explosions. According to Gladkov, 1 civilian died and 2 others are being treated in a local hospital. Institute for the Study of War says Ukraine increasingly pressuring Russian positions as counteroffensive continues. In its latest update, the Institute for the Study of War said Ukraine's counteroffensive operations are increasingly pressuring Russian positions and logistics in eastern Kharkiv, northern Luhansk, and eastern Donetsk Oblast. According to the governor, 5 civilians killed, 6 injured in Donetsk Oblast in past 24 hours. 5 more grain ships leave ports of Odessa Oblast. Prosecutor General's office says Russia's war killed 384 children, injured 753 since February 24th. Ukrainian MP Derkach put on wanted list, accused of treason. Lawmaker Andriy Derkach has received at least $567,000 from Russia's law enforcement to discredit Ukraine in the international arena, according to the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. In June, Ukraine's security service also exposed a Russian agent network allegedly spearheaded by Derkach. Suspilne says, a Ukrainian news channel, explosions reported in Russian-occupied Kherson. Citing Yuri Sobolevsky, first deputy head of Kherson Oblast Council, Suspilne reported explosions in Russian-occupied Kherson. Russian media, Russian proxy killed by explosion in occupied Luhansk. Update, Russian media report casualties following explosions in Kherson, in occupied Kherson. Russia's state-controlled TASS news agency reported that 1 person died and 1 was injured as a result of the explosions in the temporarily occupied Kherson on September 16th. Russia once again hits hydraulic facilities in Kryvyi Rih with missiles. Dnipropetrovsk Oblast Governor Valentin Reznichenko said the damages inflicted on the infrastructure by the September 16th strikes were severe but didn't provide details. Russia has repeatedly targeted critical infrastructure in Kyiv Independent. The earlier attack on the local dam on September 14th had caused the flooding of over 100 homes, according to Alexander Vikul, the head of the city's military administration. Belarus Weekly. Belarus allows Russia to use 2 military bases for more than 25 years. Military exercises continue on both sides of the border, and Minsk focuses on improving offensive operations while Kyiv bolsters its demining and defensive efforts. Belarus allows Russia to use 2 military bases for 25 more years. Minsk also unveils the first units of the long-awaited People's Militia. Meanwhile, Belarusian volunteers fighting alongside Ukrainian forces take part in Ukraine's counteroffensive in Kherson Oblast, suffering losses. Some U.S. officials disappointed about sanctions' impact on Russian economy. U.S. to inspect collective grave site in liberated Izyum. Impunity kills. Kyiv Independent joins call for further investigation of journalist Grigory Gangadze's murder. On September 16, 2000, a group of law enforcers kidnapped Ukrainian journalist Grigory Honhadze. His mutilated, headless body was later found near Kyiv. 22 years later, those who ordered the murder of Honhadze still have not been identified and punished. Grigory Honhadze was an award-winning Ukrainian journalist who was exposing corruption in the post-Soviet Ukrainian government of Leonid Kuchma. For his efforts and innovative ways of bringing news to the Ukrainian public after he had been fired and blacklisted from every respectable Ukrainian channel, have been widely feared and clearly widely broken up by the Ukrainian authorities at the time. He was one of the first people to create a news site on the internet. Grigory Honhadze was a Ukrainian hero who was trying to unapologetically first of all, I want to respond to this troll very quick. It says, it's weird that so few people watch. You're very good at reading someone else's articles. Bravo. First of all, honey, the fact that you joined just now does not give you the right to criticize what I'm doing or condescendingly tell me that I'm reading someone else's articles. If you had paid more attention than just the summary before I leave in 10 minutes, this live has been an hour and 40 minutes long. And I have done much more than just read someone else's articles because I provide context to the news that aired worldwide about Ukraine. So why don't you take your condescending ass and yeet it out by yourself before one of the mods do that? And I hope that you gain something better in your life to do than to come here and say this to an unknown woman who's trying to talk about her country, because that must be a miserable existence with very little joy in your life if that is what you do in your spare time on YouTube. Have a good day. But yes, Hrihori Gagaudze was a very innovative journalist, and he was one of the original fighters for Ukrainian independence and for anti-Russian and against the Russian puppet governments in Ukraine. So Kuchma was an incredibly corrupt, incredibly Russian-leaning second leader of Ukraine post its independence, and Kuchma, to me personally, is one of the most disgusting figures in our personal Ukrainian history. But, a lot of people don't share that opinion. I am going to record a video about Hrihori Gagaudze. I don't know if it's going to be a short one for TikTok or it's going to be a longer one. Thank you, Nina, for YouTube. But we will see. But I will tell you more about the tragic story of the heroic journalist by the name Hrihori Gagaudze. Russian forces might have killed more people in Izyum than in Bucha. Explosions reported at aerodrome in Russian-occupied Melitopol, at an airbase, basically. Russian strikes on Ukraine's critical infrastructure may push the West to send more arms to Kyiv. Ukrainian air defense shoots down Russian missiles over Cherkasy Oblast. Police discovered 10 torture chambers in liberated areas in Kharkiv Oblast. Also, I'm gonna send myself this article so I don't forget about it. Recent Russian attacks kills 2, wounds 1 in Dnipropetrovsk. Bodies of Ukrainian soldiers with tied hands found at mass burial site in liberated Izyum. Ukrainian forces hit 4 areas with Russian troops at a strong point. Seizure of entire Donbass remains Russia's main war aim. Von der Leyen, I'm deeply convinced that Ukraine will win this war. Western politicians appalled by mass burial site in liberated Izyum. The EU's top diplomat Joseph Borrell said the bloc is deeply shocked by the mass graves with more than 440 bodies discovered in the city by the Ukrainian authorities. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine has been leaving a trail of blood and destruction across Ukraine, he said. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said that the Izyum atrocities may be interpreted as war crimes and there is no need to build the evidence and document the atrocities that have been committed. Greece to supply Ukraine with 40 BMP-1 infantry fighting vehicles. Some more photos from the mass burial site. Zelensky suggests resuming Russian ammonia exports if Kremlin hands back POWs. President Volodymyr Zelensky said in an interview with Reuters that he proposed the plan to the UN amid a global shortage of fertilizers. I am against supplying ammonia from Russia through our territory. I would only do it in exchange for our prisoners, he said. Ukraine has a pipeline that can pump up to 2.5 million tons of ammonia annually from Russia to Ukraine's Black Sea ports. Zelensky's idea was rejected by the Kremlin. Of course it was. Ukraine to receive first 2 NASAMS air defense systems within 2 months, says the Pentagon. Energoatom provides the Parisian nuclear power plant with urgently needed spare parts. Mounting evidence of Russian war crimes found in liberated Kharkiv Oblast. Law enforcement agencies continue to find more evidence of Russian war crimes in the recently liberated territories in Kharkiv Oblast. Police reported discovering at least 10 torture chambers in the oblast, while exhumation of bodies had begun at a mass burial site in Izyum. So this is all I have for today, but I now have a question. So while reading all of these things, I have discovered that today a lot of articles have come out on Kyiv Independent and other news sources that talk in detail about Tyra's testimony and talk in detail about everything that had been happening in Kharkiv region. And originally, I was planning on doing a live at 6 p.m. talking about what would happen when the Russian Empire, if Russia falls apart, because the empire never fell apart, it just rebranded. But now I'm thinking that, and that live was supposed to be an hour. So I'm thinking I could make the live at about 9 p.m. That way I would have more time to do everything that I need to finish before I jump on the live, which includes deep cleaning of my apartment and running some errands. And then I would do both. I would talk about what would happen if Russia this time did collapse. And I would also go over all of the articles and details, because there is a lot that came out today that I would need to read through in order to talk about it. And I could do an article reading session as we normally do later in the evening. So would you guys want me to reschedule the live for 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time? Please let me know. Oh, thank you, Natlin. Thank you so much. I'm gonna try to get some peonies. Yes, fine with me. I'll be around. Yes. Okay. All right. Oh, thank you, Annette. Thank you, Lauren. Cindy Soar, right? As Cindy snorts in the background. Okay, I will then post an update on Twitter. You are, Netlin. Thank you so much. Thank you, Diane. Sounds good. Okay. Thank you, Truthful. Also, hi, Truthful. Good night, Mariana. Okay, all right then. Then I will see you around 9 p.m. To be safe, I'll make it 9:30. But if I go on earlier, you'll obviously get a notification. But I will go ahead and reschedule it, and also I will post an update on Twitter. Okay, bye guys, and see you later. Please come around. And Europe time. Oh my gosh, Annette. I'm 5 hours behind Zero Meridian. So I'm 5 hours behind London, if that helps you figure out what time zone I'm in and what time that will be where you're at. All right. See you later, guys. Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter. Bye, guys.